Welcome to the 6-5 podcast. I'm your host today, Daniel Newman of Futurum Research, joined by my always and ever-present co-host in co-hosting crime, I may call him, although I don't know what the crime is, Patrick Moorhead of Moor Insights Strategy. Patrick, happy Friday to you. What a week in tech it has been.
I know, it's been great. By the way, I am guilty of the crime of being right most of the time. Oh, okay, that was bad. It has been quite a week. You and I both attended Nvidia GTC 20 and the AWS Online Summit. Great stuff.
Yeah, just a few of them. And our show narrative has changed so much. We've attended event after event after event, after briefing, after event, after, media spot, and we don't actually have to move. And so we no longer have to have our every show little discussion about where we are. So everyone out there that's our regular listener knows we used to do that. The new sort of normal, whatever this might be, is paving the way to new and different introductions to every one of our podcasts. But yeah, Pat, great week. It really has been so much going on, so much to talk about. And even just from yesterday to today, when we started planning to hop on and do our weekly show, more things popped up. So quick reminder for everyone out there, this is the 6-5. And the reason it's the 6-5 is because we do 6 topics, deep analysis, as little news as possible. We try to talk about each thing for about 5 minutes, although we are imperfect specimens. And we hope that everybody out there really enjoys this. I do have to do a little disclaimer, a little, to be aware. This show is for information and entertainment purposes only. So while we will talk about publicly traded companies, we might talk about earnings or stocks, please do not take anything we say as financial advice. But Patrick, are you ready to rock and roll?
I am, Daniel. Let's do this.
All right. Well, let's jump in first, Pat. Last week, we had a tremendous opportunity to, talk to AWS on our 6-5 podcast. And that episode is live and you'll have to check it out. But we also attended the AWS Summit this week online. There was a lot of news there. You've worked with them longer than I have, so I'll let you kick this topic off.
Yeah, it was great having Jeff Barr, VP and Chief Evangelist on, and I believe we broadcasted that a couple of days ago, and Jeff brought in some of the new stuff. And what I want to talk about, Daniel, were some of the highlights. You knowing AWS, when they do hundreds of announcements every time, you can't possibly cover all. A couple of them that stood out for me, and one of them was Amazon Kendra. So Amazon Kendra is an enterprise search where they pull up your data, they index it, and then they delete it to give you really good results. And anyone who's ever done corporate search knows that it's really, really awful, right? You're looking for the nearest bathroom, and it gives you the instructions to take apart a bathroom or something like that. Or you're asking a question about benefits, and it gives you 2,700 results, PDFs that you can go through. Kendra is like the search that you've always wanted. It's like consumer search, where you do a search on how long is the restaurant open, and it will actually tell you when the restaurant's open. And very similarly, in consumer search, like you might have with something like Google. And the second one that I want to talk about, Daniel, and then I'll kick it over to you, is I got the chance to interview a team that nobody gets to interview. And that was the chip team. Amazon and AWS actually do their own first-party silicon. And I got to talk to the team that did their inference chip called Inferentia, and also to the compute team, EC2 Inf1 instances. And essentially got inside, got an update, because I hadn't talked to anybody since December. And net, they keep working on the software. They've seen a 40% improvements in performance on the same silicon. And, we saw similar type of stuff with Nvidia and when they do software updates, but it's really great to see a small and focused team that came by the 2015 acquisition of a company called Annapurna, really kicking butt. So if you step back and look at all the silicon that Amazon does, not only do they do their own CPUs with Graviton 2, they do their own inference chips with Inferentia, and then they do their own offload chips for networking, storage, and security as part of the Nitro layer. And I love chips. I know you love chips too, but I just get giddy when I can get in and talk to folks who basically have been slaving away for the last 6 months and haven't talked to anybody. It was great.
Yeah, there was so much news, Pat, that came out of that particular discussion. I mean, the problem with AWS, and this isn't really a problem, it's a luxury, is they announce so much stuff at any given time. You literally, I said this to Jeff Barr, and when we were on that podcast, I said, the challenge is you read their earnings on any given quarter, and there's a list of what Amazon has done, and it's like X items, 10 to 15 items, and you read about what AWS has done. And it's like 35 things long. And, it's been impressive, though, despite everything that's going on right now, despite very challenging economics, many industries that are on the brink right now, a lot of customers of Amazon AWS, the company just keeps on investing. New regions, new zones, new products, new services. So, there's a lot to be encouraged by. I thought, you mentioned the EC2. Kendra's interesting. Low code, no code with AppFlow. That was a really interesting. And then the whole expansion of the Snow family. They're making big investments right now at the edge. They're optimizing storage at the edge, which basically what they're doing is making the edge more and more like an outpost and more eventually like the data center. So what we're going to end up with is, you're going to have cloud, you're going to have the hybrid through outpost, and edge is going to be a new control plane that's going to be potentially, arguably the largest business for AWS, because we all know the volume of workloads that are going to be heading out that way.
Yeah, the more data that's on the edge, the closer the computation needs to be to that data, and that, like you said, brings out the edge.
Yeah, so a lot to cover. Good summit. If you're interested, you could take a week. You could literally spend a week just going through and going over all of the announcements and news that came out of AWS Summit Online. And that's been the fun thing, Pat, is if you're kind of a tech geek, and just wait till we talk about Nvidia here in a little bit, because some serious geekdom going on. But before we do that, let's jump over and talk about a bellwether of the kind of IT spend, and that's going to be Cisco. I had the chance to go on Bloomberg and talk a little bit about this after earnings. Yep, I did.
Flex.
Boop, boop. Sorry, self-promotion alert.
Listen, I would flex if I were on there too, and I might even mention that I was on CNBC Power Lunch today.
Oh, okay. Thanks. That's not just a flex. That's just pure one-upping. You must be the oldest child. But no, in all serious, it was a bellwether, and it was a company I was very interested in seeing how they are doing. Now, I got a note. As someone that tracks industry and equities, we are in this weird period right now where we're just starting to see the true impact COVID-19 is going to have on business performance. A lot of those early earnings for tech that came out really were Q1, where only China was the big impact. Now we're starting to see how this is coming into to impact Europe, America, Middle East, and other parts of the world. The good news was the company hit. The company hit on its earnings. It hit on its revenue. And despite the fact that it was about an 8% pullback year over year, you got to think about that with what's going on in the world and industries facing 60, 70, 80, 90% falls in certain areas. 8% is not much. And there's also a couple of caveats of what's going on with Cisco. Their earnings and their profitability is up. Their software revenue and recurring revenue is way up. It's like 74% now of their software revenue is recurring, which is really important. They had a little bit of pullback on the infrastructure side, which is a big revenue unit for the company, but not surprising. Just the China stuff alone, you can't be surprised that it had a 10 to 15% pullback in that area. But the company also was super philanthropic this last quarter. It basically stopped doing all of its traditional selling and marketing. Pat, the $250 million contribution It beefed up its backbone and infrastructure, gave away Cisco WebEx Teams and different communications platforms at no charge. It was donating money, and it was really trying to stabilize sort of its narrative during this quarter, which wasn't focused overall on selling. You're starting to see that pullback now. It's starting to get back to business as usual. The company gave forward-looking guidance, which is really encouraging, because a few weeks ago, it was starting to become a bit of a trend for all the companies to say, we don't know, we're not going to give guidance. And it's guessing on a similar trajectory for year over year. So it's saying, even with everything that's going on, all the pullbacks here, the company's only expecting to be down about 8%. And that, Pat, goes back to what you and I have talked about. We've had entire episodes here on this show. The acceleration of enterprise investment in cloud, data center, storage, applications, all areas where Cisco has a lot of investment and a lot of customers, is going to be steady. So I thought it was an overall very positive quarter. There was a lot to like about the company. And I would be very surprised not to actually see a better than expected quarter if, in fact, our guesses, Pat, and I call them guesses, but they're very educated on accelerators around 5G, network, security, and collaboration, all truly are realized over these next few quarters.
Yeah, all things considered, I thought they had a good quarter. The things that you expected to be up were up, right? I could just look at the market, and given COVID, WebEx up, subscriptions and security up. Anything that required some on-prem installation, like the core network, was down. Not a surprise at all. And I did appreciate you adding, the idea that, they basically made a $300 million response commitment, an additional $2.5 billion in business financing. Long term is the way you have to look at Cisco. And if you look at collaboration, edge networking, security, the highest speed internet networking and internet working and hybrid cloud, I think they have a very good value proposition.
Yeah, I like it. The internet of the future that's going to keep all of us connected, the backbone of broadband. Cisco's got a big part to play. So there is a lot to like. Good ads. Pat, let's talk about something that kind of broke overnight. So one of the big stories that really broke the last 24 to 48 hours has been about TSMC looking to move and build a plant in Arizona.
That's right.
And this has had big waves. It's set big waves off in terms of, the potential it has in Arizona, but also the impact with U.S.-China relations. And you went on Power Lunch on CNBC there. I'm giving you don't even need to brag. I'll just remind everybody that you're kind of a big deal. But that you went on that show, you got a chance to talk about this. But what are your thoughts on this? I'll let you go first, because I have quite a few myself.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do put, like you said, I do put TSMC, Huawei, China relations, and even COVID in a nice bucket and swirl it all up. So you have this ongoing trade spat between China and the U.S. You also have an IP and security spat that's going on as well. The other thing that is going on is the administration and its relations with China related to COVID, where whether it's calling it the China virus or something like that, there seems to be some impetus in Washington about paybacks. Now, the other thing that's going on is related to the Department of Defense's fear of China invading Taiwan or North Korea invading South Korea. And those two countries, Taiwan and South Korea, were all, with the exception of Intel, where all high performance leading edge silicon is made. So that FPGA in a missile or in a new tank or something like that, likely made in Taiwan. And with Global Foundries getting on a new strategy to do more low power things, that literally left the only leading edge foundry there were no leading edge foundries outside of the United States. And I know that's a small part of Intel's business, but with some of the challenges they've had with 10 nanometer, they've pulled back a little bit. So TSMC had a choice. Either the U.S. government's going to help build its own foundry with the help of likely Intel and Global Foundries and maybe somebody else, or they can pony up and do their own silicon. And that's what you see here. Is TSMC belling up to the bar, and I don't know how much funding yet is from the federal government, but to build almost a leading edge fab. I mean, leading edge would be 3 nanometer at this time, but this will be 5 nanometer, where most of the volume will be. And then where Huawei comes in on this whole thing is today a new decree went out that said, hey, Huawei, right? It's not just you putting your designs and doing them in TSMC, but it's you've used equipment like Applied Materials or KLA-10 Core or somebody US-based equipment or Synopsys tool to make this. So now everybody needs to ask us permission and get a license from the government to do that. And I'm almost over, to make a long story longer. And then state media out of China said, okay, we'll put Qualcomm and Intel and Nvidia, we'll put them on our banned state list. So here we are, one big happy mess we're in.
Yeah, this is going to play out. Make no mistake, there's nothing about the economy here. This is all tit for tat politics that's going on here. But it will have a big impact on the economy if it's not resolved. I think TSMC, it's smart. I mean, I can't see how this is a bad thing for that company, being able to build and manufacture and ship within the U.S. without any worries about global, any sort of, global tariffs and economic constraints that are being created right now. We don't know what's going to happen in the wake of this, Pat. That's the thing, is it's an election year. We do know, depending on who is elected in November, that the relationship with China could vary vastly from where it is today, because you have polarizing courts on how to handle China. The one thing I will say, Jim Cramer said this, and I don't always love everything that guy says, although I do love his energy. He did say there's a time to have this discussion. He's not in the camp of let's not negotiate with China. He's in the camp of, we need to negotiate, but he's saying not now.
Yeah.
Let's get through this. And that is really, that he shares a sentiment with me, is I think right now we need to keep the economy turning. We need to keep every business that's going. Let's not do anything to harm Boeing right now. Let's not do anything to harm the proliferation of 5G or Qualcomm or the growth of AI and Nvidia. It doesn't make sense right now. When we've got coronavirus under control, we can come back to the table. We can have that conversation. So I don't love the politics involvement. I think from a TSMC standpoint, I think they're on the right track. I think, I'm always for more here, bring more jobs here, bring more opportunities here. And let's be a place where semiconductors, which will eat the world, are manufactured and being put into devices that we're using every day.
Yeah, I like that attitude, Daniel. And if I could just add, China and the U.S. have a symbiotic relationship. We both rely on each other. We made that decision 25 years ago, and there's no just magically breaking us apart. And one thing I wanted to add, that TSMC could get some pushback here in the U.S. if we find that the federal government has given them money, and companies like Global Foundries and Intel, who have put hundreds and thousands of people to work and have invested billions in their fab, didn't get that money. I mean, where was the Obama administration when Global Foundries was trying to get more funding to keep leading edge 7 nanometer EUV going? Right? It was nowhere. And again, that's not a political statement. It might as well be the Trump administration. But where was that money, and why is it suddenly important now?
Yeah, I am a big fan of what Intel and Global Foundries are doing. So certainly don't mistake my encouraging take on TSMC. But there is going to be devices. There are going to be more chips sourced There's clearly a deficiency in chips for the number of devices people want. People got to remember, it's not just laptops and phones. It's servers, it's storage, it's every piece of gear right now. It's all the IoT, it's vehicles. They all need chips. Everything needs chips. And the one thing we've run into over the last few years is we just don't have enough chips.
Exactly.
So more is good. More will get us more economic. We'll be able to deploy smart cities, smart grids, more IoT, more edge, more data center. It'll all be enabled. I think it's an and. I think if this grows, Intel grows, Global Foundry grows, everything grows. Speaking of grows, Nvidia GTC 2020, Jensen Huang, CEO's vision for AI grows. And this was a big event. I had the chance to talk to Jensen a couple weeks ago. Good conversation. This was right after they finished acquiring making the $6.9 billion acquisition of Mellanox. And he was hinting at some things that he eventually talked about at GTC, Pat. But there were really two sides to the GTC event. I'm going to talk a little bit about the enterprise AI because that's where I'm focusing. I'd love to get your take on this, but also maybe you can talk a little bit about the gamings and graphics, because I know they had some big announcements there. But let's start on the enterprise side, because I know you and I, that's our passion. Three big announcements for me that really caught my attention, and you could sort of call what they did at the edge a fourth. But the first big announcement was Merlin. The recommender engines are the future of the internet. Being able to filter, being able to identify, being able to find similar profiles and help people gain access. All commerce right now that we're using in this stay-at-home economy that we like is being driven by recommendation engines. That is a function of AI, of framework, and NVIDIA has a leading edge framework here that is being used by just about every major hyperscale cloud to enable these companies that we're using, whether it's getting the right toppings on your Chipotle burrito, or it's, it's picking out your favorite show to watch, or getting the right stuff from Amazon, or this is all happening because of recommendation engines. They've up-leveled what they're offering. They've made it simple with as little as 50 lines of code. Basically, any company right now that's deployed in hyperscale cloud can benefit from the Merlin infrastructure. That was a big move. Then let's talk about Jarvis, conversational AI. Right now, we use bots. We're starting to get used to the idea of interacting with machines, but it's just not good enough. Right now, most of the interactions we have with bots are somewhat mundane or very, there's no turns, no real conversation. It's kind of ask and get, and a lot of times it's not right. There's a couple of issues there. The models and frameworks actually exist to get more accurate, and Jensen talked a lot about this, Pat. But the other side of this, the real problem is to do conversational correctly, you need a ton of horsepower. And you need a ton of horsepower. You need the right model, the right data, the right framework, the right GPUs and systems. And then on top of that, you need to remove the latency. So, what he talked about was if you wanted to have a conversation with a bot in real time, maybe a vehicle, maybe it's a retailer to get service, it could take up to about 29 seconds to actually for it to fully go out to all the data available at its disposal, infer from that data, and come back to you and respond to you in a conversational manner. What Jensen basically said is they're taking this down to milliseconds with Jarvis, and this is a single line of code that has been built in to be able to be supported by the frameworks that NVIDIA launched. So that's the second one. And of course, I'll get all your comments. Just let me go here for one more minute, and I'll get you in on this because I'm sure you got some things to say. But the third one is Ampere, and this one was like, if you're not watching this on video, I'm going to make that little motion of head exploding. Okay, there's a lot here, but essentially, as we all know, there's a lot of discrete computing that goes on in the data center. CPUs, GPUs, VPUs, NPUs. You got different types of networking that connects these devices so they can operate and interact effectively and efficiently. But basically, NVIDIA just said, forget it. We're going to build this A100. We're going to build one machine for all AI and all the AI needs. You need scale up. You need scale out. You need analytics. You need big data. You need, rendering. You need video processing. Whatever AI workload you're trying to use, we got this one single catch-all. And then on top of this, Pat, he lays out the data center of today, the AI data center of today, 25 racks, X hundreds of CPUs, X hundreds of thousands of kilowatts of power. And, I think it was like $11 million per, I don't know if it was per rack or per the whole thing. And then he basically said, now what you've done with these 25 racks, we can put into one rack with a single, with the A100. You can have this single GPUs that can be parsed into up to 52 shared instances of a GPU. And I think there's 8 of them, right, in each instance, Pat?
Yeah, MIG.
Yeah, it's the
multi-instance GPU.
Multi-instance GPU. Thank you. It's also a fighter jet. Pretty cool. But you can have all this, and it's $1 million. So you just took the economics of the data center. On top of that, I think it's 10% of the power draw of a traditional data center. So you just made it more power efficient, more cost efficient, and it's 10 times more powerful than that traditional AI data center. So when I say my mind was blown, the economics of this, it felt to me, Pat, the only thing, and I was kind of trying to look, what's the downside of what was announced? I said the downside is you skipped 4 generations of procurement of sales opportunities, because you've basically said, you could have taken it 2 times and then maybe brought the cost down by 20%. And people would have been like, this is great. But you just took the cost down by 90%, and you took the power draw down, and which is good, by the way, for sustainability purposes. But that was the big takeaway, Pat, is the AI data center with the Ampere A100 literally just leapfrogged generations ahead. And he basically just kind of launched the whole category, which is going to put massive pressure on all the competitors to have to accelerate their offerings to be competitive for the hyperscalers and any sort of enterprise data centers being built out.
Man, you are one excited pup on this event. Yeah, let me just net out the important things, the big takeaways. So first off, we saw a combination of new Ampere architecture, Mellanox networking, 20x AI performance. They also added a new instruction for 32-bit processing that's part of. NVIDIA empathetically said that doing training and inference on the same chip is good and it's efficient. And that's really important because there's about 50 startups out there doing inference and not training. And VCs are probably losing sleep over it right now. And listen, we'll see how the numbers bear out if it makes sense to do both training and inference on the same machine. The other thing I think we saw was an absolute melding at the architectural level between Mellanox and NVIDIA. And NVIDIA doesn't do a lot of acquisitions. And this was the biggest one that they had done. And I see symbiosis happening big time. And it makes sense, right? The way that you scale NVIDIA is through high-speed networking. And the way that you come up with a building block of the data center that Jensen essentially coined is by connecting everything over high-speed networking, and that's Mellanox. So
basically, no loss.
Yeah, I mean, it's always some, but you have to connect it together somehow because we have limited our ability to put this on a single chip. So you have to put it on multiple chips, and to your point, you can't have a lot of loss there. So next step for this is to see what NVIDIA does in gaming with Ampere. And very rarely does NVIDIA talk about gaming at this event. This is primarily a core architecture event and an AI and automotive and edge show. And so I'll be looking forward along with analyst Anshul Sag.
Yeah, he did talk a little bit about some rendering. He did a little bit of show and tell on some rendering with this new technology. But yeah, you're right. It was primarily a data center. And did I sound excited? I apologize. I am a geek. And sometimes when my mind was blown. My mind was blown because, like I said, as an analyst, but also as an, economics and a business guy, I just said the economics of this is going to be so interesting on its impact on market as this becomes GA.
Yeah.
Companies are outfitting data centers, and as hyperscalers are investing in infrastructure. And I actually said, maybe the biggest mistake they made was, did they just eat their own lunch? How much volume growth do they anticipate in the wake of the fact that now you can replace 25 racks with one.
Right.
So
And I love, and I love companies who call airstrikes in on themselves when they have the upper hand, and that is true. Because listen, either your competitors are going to do it or you're going to do it. And Nvidia decided to, Osborne all their old stuff with all their new stuff. It's great.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes. We'll watch the earnings, but I think in terms of innovation, it was very, very impressive. Hey, Pat, we're a little long-winded today, and it's my fault. Too excited today, but we got a couple items left. We'll try to keep it moving along. Pat, there was a launch on Microsoft Surface that you had a chance to sit in on. What happened there?
Yeah, it was great. So first off, Microsoft Surface business over the last 4 quarters has generated $6 billion in revenue. So this is a major company, and I think they're well on their way to become a $10 billion high profit entity. And they brought out some updates, and I just want to hit on what those updates mean. So first of all, in their Surface Book 3, they enabled quadro graphics. And what that essentially does is put them in the workstation market. There are software packages like Dassault that require certification on things like Quadro or on Radeon Pro if you're AMD. So that's a market expansion move for them. They improved their Surface Go 2, which is a competitor to the iPad. The 10-inch version gave it a better display, a better modem, faster processor, and it's interesting to see Apple adding expertise to a keyboard when years before they said the combination of this type of device was a fridge toaster. You don't just put a refrigerator and a toaster together. So I think this is a real leadership move for them. And the final thing I'm going to hit on is that Microsoft got into the earbud market. And you might see it's a large dial. I actually have one in here, and I dig it up. But essentially, that large dial is to put a bunch of gestures on. And whether you want to invoke Siri or Google or even Cortana, or do everything you want to do on music. And it also has gestures for Office and OneNote and things like that. I'm going to be reviewing those items, so stay tuned.
Yeah, that's awesome. I look forward to reading through it. I am looking at a Surface Studio, it actually coming here into my studio as a new toy. Yep.
Whoa.
Yep.
What do you know, Daniel? I need to get on that mailing list.
Yeah, sorry, buddy. It's for special handsome guys only. But no, in all serious, I've tried the Amazon Buds. I've tried the Galaxy Buds. I've got the Apple Pros, AirPod Pros. I am looking forward to trying the Surface ones. I like the idea. I'm not sure I'm sold on the aesthetics yet, but the overall Surface stuff, all very exciting. Let's hit the last item, Pat. We spent the whole beginning of our week on it. But IBM Think, big digital event. First one under CEO Arvind Krishna. Multi-days, multi-format, a lot of content, pretty solid delivery. I think we're all getting toasted on the volume of video deliveries now. I think we all could use some live, but some really interesting stuff came out of it, Pat. I think there's a couple of interesting things to talk about here that caught my attention. I focus primarily on the company, corporate, and cloud. Those are the two areas I dial in closest on. And I thought they had a couple of important announcements. One was the satellites. So IBM announced, the launch of what they're calling IBM Satellite, or IBM Public Cloud Satellite. And IBM Public Cloud Satellite, for those that are, not deeply in the IBM public cloud know, but understand the overall public cloud space like AWS, you would know Outposts. So IBM is, coming to market with a solution to compete with Outposts, to enable its users in public cloud to move towards hybrid solutions and to be able to use, the benefits of Red Hat and OpenShift to be able to create consistent control planes, the same look, same feel, APIs, SDK for software continuity across different cloud locations. And I think their big differentiator, if I had to point something out, Pat, that caught my eye, was they're really taking a meet you where you are approach when it comes to infrastructure. So as we all know, the Amazon thing, to make Outposts work, you really need to sort of deploy Amazon, not sort of, you do need to just deploy Amazon's hardware on-prem. IBM is saying you don't need to do that as long as you meet a certain set of minimum requirements. So that was something I think that was really interesting. I wrote about that. We'll put that in the show notes. I want to make sure we keep moving. The other one was just a quick update that I want to give, is about their financial services public ready cloud. And the company had made some big announcements about a partnership with Bank of America. When you're trying to move compliance-driven industries into cloud, there is a lot of red tape. So IBM wisely partnered with one of the world's largest banks, and Bank of America, to build out the right architecture support framework to deliver public cloud experiences in a hybrid environment using best of breed from the company's Z systems, Z Linux One platform. And so they have updated on that. It's going to become more generally available later in this year. I think this is a big play, though, Pat. I think for IBM, they want to be an enterprise cloud company. The company, I think vertical cloud solutions could be a big opportunity for them, because this is the gap. This is the big gap in public cloud, is if you have a compliance, sovereignty, very governed industry, there's a lot of specialization. So if you can be the first, with like the Bank of America, to have a great proof of concept that can be scaled and quickly deployed, you will see others follow, because it's trust businesses like businesses that are in similar cases. So those are the couple of things that caught my attention. We wrote about a few more things. I'll put them in the show notes, Pat. I know you cover deeply beyond cloud as well, but anything on cloud or anywhere else you want to touch on here?
Yeah, I'll just echo your sentiments on environments that are highly regulated, where security and privacy issues can put you out of business. And for those who are counting at home, the losses or the fines from security breaches actually exceed those of losses from security. Because when you're a regulated industry, you have to tell regulators where every bit of data is. Is it encrypted? Where is it encrypted? How do you know all of this stuff? And people fail to mention that, which is why I think IBM's financial services ready public cloud is a great idea, and I think they're going to do well with that. The only other thing I'm going to touch on is that IBM announced essentially an IoT and edge software platform to be able to manage edge workloads, and also those related to 5G. We've seen a lot of these come out, things like Azure IoT Edge. You can imagine with AWS Satellite, the type of software load that companies like Verizon are going to run on that. We've seen Project Horizon as well from VMware, that's now Azure IoT. So this is essentially an IoT platform that is targeted to carriers. And IBM does really well at carriers, right? You look at IBM Thinks and who gets up on stage, the CEO of Verizon, AT&T, all the big domestic carriers, and also again, for reliability reasons, people go IBM.
And you can't under I guess I would say you can't not give enough credit to Red Hat, Pat, on just how important that is to this whole edge and telco and getting, because I was to say underestimate, you can't underestimate the importance. I don't know why that word wouldn't come to me, but we live, we learn. But no, I'm just saying, like, OpenShift, Red Hat, because what we are seeing in the modern telco infrastructure and the modern telco edge is software defined network function virtualization, and OpenShift and Red Hat are a great place to start with building cloud native applications to rapidly deploy to the edge. So there was more to the Red Hat acquisition than most people realized. This is really making a big impact for IBM and giving the company a legitimate chance to compete for that third spot. Not saying they're going to get there, but saying they're legitimately showing progress. Something to watch. Good show for IBM, Pat. Good 6-5 today. Really enjoyed having you on. Always fun to spend this much time geeking out. Again, everybody, thanks for sticking with us a little longer, 7-8 minutes longer than our normal show, but just so much good stuff. And trust me, offline, if you have a chance, one day we'll take you backstage. Him and we're spattering back and forth before we start the show. What are we going to talk about? Talk about this one. No, we're going to talk about that one. And it's like, because we've limited ourselves to 6. But the beauty is there's always next week. So please hit that subscribe button, stick with the 6-5, tune into a lot of our episodes, our Insider series. We've had some great ones in the last few weeks. Next week, we have Alan Trefler, the CEO of Pega, joining us. But for everyone out there, we got to say goodbye for now. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.